Assalamu alaikum, fam. Hope you're doing well. So, I want to talk to you today about why I really started seeing that riots are not a way to get what you want. And obviously, I'm learning about how Islam does not allow protests, and there's huge discussions about it as I have learned. But I'm gonna talk about it from a non Muslim perspective and just in terms of the American perspective, right? So, what I was thinking is my whole journey where at first I supported the BLM riots because I thought that through that pressure campaign of raw energy that there would be some past legislation in the police departments. But then Antifa, this very, very far left anarchist movement, parasited itself onto the grassroots black liberation movement. And Antifa is filled with self-hating white liberals and leftists, anarchists and communists who are really into the rainbow mafia. They even believe in wolfkin, other kin energies. Pretty psychotic people. Really psychotic people. And this derailed it, and I started to say, well, if they've joined this movement, I can't be part of it because these people, I don't agree with anything they promote. They say tax the rich, and you're like, yeah, I can agree with that. But then they start going on to more and more social issues, and then I realized these people are not someone I want to look up to, and I have followed their movements and their political philosophy for quite some time, about 7-8 years. So I'm very familiar with the group and their strategies, their talking points, how they're trained, what they're about, what they're upon. And when they got into the riots during the summer, I saw them riot in Portland for over 100 days straight. I saw how the media covered for them. I saw how they said looting and robbing were reparations, stolen land, and that insurance companies can just pay those small businesses who were already struggling money. And then I saw how insurance companies were actually raising the price on small businesses for their insurance. Some didn't get their full what they were earned after their businesses were looted, burned, and destroyed, rocks thrown through the windows. And then in Kenosha, I saw a furniture store burn, and the store owners, they were white and they were crying. And then I saw other white people and other races saying, F those white tears. And, those people were innocent. They had nothing to do with anything. And then pause that for a second. I saw in South Africa recently there was those huge riots, and I saw all these strangers go into a small farm, steal this guy's goats, his chickens, and then the very couple days later everything is destroyed and all those people are lining up for food. So I started to realize how these inner cities where rioting occurs, there is no solution. You destroy your own environment. People hate you and people turn on you once they start hearing the voices of the oppressed. And I really was on the heat of that energy when it first started. And it really did overcome me to where I was like, we have to push forward. We can't have this. And then I found out that Floyd was, he overdosed on drugs. He was leaned on, but that the police department trained them to do that. He had a huge criminal record where he put a gun to a pregnant woman's belly. He did porn. He was not some noble citizen, even though he didn't deserve that. And then I realized all the millions upon millions of dollars worth of property damage that taxpayers will have to pay for were caused by this one guy, and him and Derek Chauvin had previously worked together. And it was a mess all around, but I realized that's not justice. It's not justice to destroy and terrorize communities. I watched Antifa and their Black Bloc and BLM went through Oakland, 600 people deep, banging on drums with their sirens, and really terrorizing residential neighborhoods, and the police and the activist liberals and the district attorneys would let these rioters out of jail, and Kamala Harris crowdfunded for them through Act Blue, and there was all these manipulated Martin Luther King quotes, and there was just mass chaos. One time, we drive in, they blocked the road. We had to go through Richmond, which was more of a dangerous area. And, if we would have broke down there, we could have got robbed. Like, we had to go around their riots because where they block off, where they protest, it's like quite strange. And the disruption they did, it turns people off from their movement. And when I saw like all the beautiful nature around me, knowing that it could all be burned because a cop and a criminal had an exchange, that becomes kind of terrifying. Where all these trees that take years to grow could be burned because over-emotional, manipulated crowds that are being looted for their money and energy and directed in non-beneficial ways, can cause mass destruction to innocent people. When they lit the Wendy's on fire, I was like, wow, all those people who work there, the small, because when you buy a franchise building, like somebody individually has that as well as having a contract with the chain and the corporation, and they had their business burned because some guy and a cop had an exchange, right? And the media did not tell people that Floyd had swallowed all his drugs, and that he was saying he couldn't breathe before he was even on the ground, and that social media hid certain footage. And then I realized how the raw energy was hijacked and manipulated, and I felt an intense amount of guilt for having promoted it, participated in that, and thinking that was a viable way to create change. And then, for example, Big Bear, he was saying, if you really want change, stay married, start a farm, donate to charity, volunteer in classrooms. There are healthy, beneficial, positive ways to create change. And I started realizing that protesting doesn't really do anything, and rioting doesn't do anything, and that a sane, rational person creates a strategic plan that will convince and persuade, not coerce and threaten. And that real revolutions come from when there's a ground force, when you have for example, look how Australia is really oppressing a lot of its people, forcefully medicating them. There's a point where it's like that is quite, really heavy medical fascism, really overriding your bodily autonomy. That's when people have to say no. But to destroy everything because of a drug addict criminal and a cop, and simply making it worse because their skin shades were different, I started to realize I'm never going to support these kind of childish riots. And then the Antifa anarchists in Portland created a CHOP zone, an autonomous zone, where there was people shot in there. There was one person who was sexually assaulted. These was highly strange. There was a lot of drugs. They tried to make it like a summer of love, but then you see footage of people being assaulted, people walking around with guns, and you're like, you can't just create an autonomous zone in a taxpayer-funded city. That's not how it works. If you want to buy land and start your own a private club, right, with membership stuff, then do that, right? You can create a commune where you buy land and people contribute. You can do that kind of stuff, but to occupy and harass cars as they drive by, cursing at them. There was, an old lady was crossing the street. It's one of the most famous clips, and a Asian Antifa member was screaming in her face, calling her a Nazi. And she's a grandma, probably 82 years old, has no idea what's going on. And she's literally with her walker walking across the street. And then, you see how that type of activism is not helpful. And they at first compared it to how the founding fathers dumped tea in the harbor. That was against the monarchical power. And the people were way more moral and united, sophisticated, less degenerate, and less co-optable than that. And they had a singular message of liberty, and they wanted a constitutional republic, and they did not want to have a monarchical force in a distant land dictating what colonies do, right? Different than trying to get legislation passed for police reform. And then, just the constant rioting when they were outside the White House of Trump, and then Trump was evacuated, I started seeing how we got addicted to action-based drama, and that we were watching people waste time, not create solutions, only cause destruction that taxpayers will have to fix. And this type of raw anger needs to be channeled into actually creating a parallel culture, being more personally moral, and accountability and responsibility are the solutions to making everything better. And then they hijack their brains into thinking that defunding the police was good, and when we have less police officers, we're less safe. And yes, there are corrupt police, but the solution to that isn't less cops, especially when there's high unemployment, high inflation, and crime is rampant. We are, because of leftist leadership and their, manipulation of our emotions, we're really soft on crime, and criminals have seen this frailty. And defunding cops, slowly reducing our Second Amendment, encouraging a degenerate lifestyle through OnlyFans, drugs, certain genres of music that promote criminal behavior, idolizing celebrities who promote criminal behavior, even though they're millionaires and they don't live like that, they still promote it. You start to see how this is a weapon of getting people to ruin their own environment. It's like getting them to defecate in their own living room, and then when they step all in it, they complain that they're oppressed, when actually you're the one who defecated in the wrong spot. And so if we want to make communities better, you start community gardens, you tell women to sleep with their husbands, you discourage abortion and encourage marriage and motherhood, responsibility. You have more people, instead of hanging out on the streets smoking weed, you tell them to, start our own boys club where they exercise, where they can get hunting skills, where they can get, trade skills of learning how to do construction. These are the things that will change the culture. But begging the government for your rights is not necessarily a solution, because the government bureaucracy is so large that you're not really going to get immediate change. If you don't want police around, don't allow crime. Have a very high moral community where people say no. If someone's outside chucking bottles, someone's outside doing open prostitution, selling drugs, chase them out of your neighborhood, call the cops on them. You have to make the cockroaches leave your neighborhood. And not everyone deserves to live in, crime-ridden neighborhoods because you want to have a cool gangster thug lifestyle. And if you want to act a certain way, you have to take responsibility for what you act. You can't play the actor of being a thug and then complain when police treat you that way. If you carry yourself in a moral high-class manner or a rustic farmer manner, people will leave you alone because your energy isn't vibrating at a degenerate frequency. So rioting, to me now, I think it totally makes sense that Islam doesn't allow it, because I got to see, for example, they had no plan, and the leaders, this has been proven without a reasonable doubt, even though leftist journalists tried to lie about it. So many of the BLM people were not donating their money to 501c3 charities. They were not certified, and a lot of them were keeping the money. And one of the main founders, she has 5 mansions in an all-white neighborhood. And the other founders, they had this sort of praise for Mao and Lenin and their communist manifestos. And I started realizing, the hypocrisy. Another BLM founder, was caught buying jewelry and other stuff like that. And I realized how if a government politician, right, like a politician essentially, if they are like Kamala Harris, if they're endorsing you, if CNN is covering for you, they're actually manipulating your energy into where they want to channel you to go. And that a real raw movement can't have Antifa in it and can't have corporate backing. And I didn't realize this till after, because they convinced people to defund cops and to be softer on crime, and that actually made things worse. And they won't admit it. Ilhan Omar of the Minneapolis Police Department, she defunded it. And I watched the video where she said, dismantle it and all that crap that she says. And then she turns around in another speech that I watched and says, the police aren't doing their job. They're not stopping crime. And it's like, you're the one who demonized them. You're the one who told them they were these horrible people. And now people are calling out to you as a representative to do your job, and you're not doing it. So you began to see how the open corruption of the squad, of the very new populist left, and how their encouragement of riots caused much more damage, and they offered zero solutions besides rioting. And I remember when the mayor of Portland, his apartment building was besieged, they lit firecrackers. You may think that that's going to get him to obey, and it kind of did and kind of didn't. But at the same time, these people could, give more in personal charity. They could build something. If you want poverty to end, look at what you spend your finances on and ask how you could do better. But people rather not do without, and they rather have the government be their daddy and create the solutions. Liberals think the government is the solution to problems, whereas in the traditional Americana conservatism, individuals are responsible and the government is a means to protect your rights and to offer national security and a functioning infrastructure and stuff like that. But liberals have created more of a nanny state of sort of this pseudo-communist imploding energy of hand over more of your taxes, we'll provide for you, but you're now under our control. And they demonize rugged individualism. If you are a responsible person, you don't have time to riot. And I realized a lot of those people had part-time jobs. Some of them are living in public housing, living on Section 8, on food stamps. So they had time to riot. But a responsible person who's actually building, creating, leading by example, has a proper family, they didn't have time to engage in this sort of reckless, destructive, community-destroying behavior. And that when you're overly angry, you can't think clearly, right? When you're hyper-emotional and you're jumping on cop cars, it looks cool in a picture for a minute, but then you realize how much that cop car costs, and that is directly coming from the city budget. And that the city budget means if they got to cut somewhere to pay for something else. And if you're a small business owner, you love the police because there's a bunch of crazy people high on meth. And since the liberals, the liberal atheists, they glorify, legalizing, taxing, and regulating all drugs. They're very pro-drug, pro-intoxicants. And so when people are high on meth, peeing in front of a store, and a small business owner who's an immigrant from Sri Lanka or India or Pakistan or China or South Korea is saying, hey, where's the police officer? And there's a woke liberal university brat who's in student debt and, working at Starbucks says, police are colonizers and all this stuff. Well, now that business owner has to move. And if that business owner moves, that's less tax revenue for the city, which means less money for police, which means more criminals don't have to worry about avoiding a police officer. So the cycle continues because the leftists have spent too much time in their university classrooms, less time in creating when there used to be more. In 2002, 2003, the liberals were more like organic farming, against Monsanto, against Coca-Cola, against McDonald's. Now they've gone into a more radical route, and they have not focused on actual solutions in creating a parallel society. So the wisdom that Islam has about not rioting because the destruction to the economy will be worse makes a lot of sense now. And I think these past, going on 3 years, I really got to see it. I participated in protests, and now I see that literally does nothing. The average person gets oppressed and really gets frustrated and already has a stressful day. And you're making the pressure on them, thinking that it's going to make them want to bend the knee to you. when in reality they're just going to despise you because they have to go on the rat race to work and pay their bills. So if you want to create change, you have to build it and have the people arrive to you through their own choice. And you have to actually do the hard work and suffer and convince people of your ideas and be the shining lighthouse on the cliff so that the other ships passing by with their resources might beware of the rocks, but also pull into port and share some of their cargo with you in a metaphorical way, right? So now I really understand how rioting and protesting doesn't do much. You have to create different, clever, unique ways through, sticker campaigns, art. I mean, there's so many unique ways, but you have to be unreliant on the system. You have to lead by example and accept what comes with it. And the government is as moral as the people are. If you don't like your government, it's because the morality, the debauchery, the family unit, the respect for God has decreased, and it's only in name, and you've been overtaken by people who are trying to undermine your society, or another nation's or another cultish regime has decided to do, psychological operations on your country. And that's what those summer riots were. People, instead of saying Black Lives Matter, they said burn, loot, murder. And that is what happened. And instead of having, these passionate speeches that made sense and where people can go through rationality, there was raw energy, which was powerful, but it could have been directed into, way better areas. And the flames of hatred that spewed and scorched innocent people's lives and traumatized children as they saw it, this was not a way to create the, endearment that is needed. You have to unify, through a common love and bond, and that the iron fist can work sometimes, but you have to be in a position of political power. And that most of the politicians who agreed with the rioting, they didn't actually agree with it. They just wanted to be reelected. And so and then they can betray you once they're elected. So no changes happen. So if you want your society to not need police, you have to be hyper moral. And this means the boys need fathers, women have to stay married, and men have to be role models, and women have to care about their community, and less drugs need to be in the culture, because when people get high, they commit mass crimes. And it's time to get law and order back into modes of being, and we have to really encourage the closing of liquor stores in a certain community where they can't get access to these certain liquors. We have to, call the police on drug dealers. You have to pressure them all out. And you have to have local militias who actually can help the police and keep pimps, drug dealers, thugs out of the community, and creepy, sniveling pedophiles and whatever else is out there out. And any girl who is selling her body, you ridicule her, you pressure her out, and you exile people. You exile them from the community, or you make their life very difficult, and you force them to be moral, rational, a good citizen, a spiritual person, or, an intellectualized atheist, whatever it is, but you pressure them into being more moral, and you do not have tolerance of this fake idea that's manipulated of freedom to just be a hedonist in public, a degenerate in public. You have to force that out if you don't want police always showing up, because what you allow is what you're going to get back. So if you don't want cops, you have to be a moral culture. You don't have a right to allow a certain level of crime to happen and then say no police should be there and no one can have a gun to defend themselves, and everyone has to just accept being preyed upon as if it's the law of the jungle again, and there aren't, laws in place. So that is why I think rioting and protesting, in a nutshell, doesn't work, and that you actually have to create real solutions, and they may not be as fast as quick as you want, but protesting is not going to do much. You have to actually just be the change. You actually have to just do it and encourage others to lead more moral, ethical lives, and that in turn will inspire people, hopefully, inshallah, to turn their heart to a better path and use their money in a better way, where people who are scamming them for funds can't, take their tax money, take their hard-earned money, and then put it to causes that are not anything to do with the charity. Lots of that money didn't go to black schools, didn't put in much in any of those poor communities. It went into the pockets of hyper corrupt people who saw the pain of certain people, and then they took it, and it was pretty bad. So create solutions. Be a problem solver. Okay, not every problem that's going to be solved is going to be fancy. So let me know what you think.